Chapter 1, Useless. If you've ever been humiliated in a room full of people you worked twice as hard as, you know the exact sound I'm about to describe. It's not laughter, it's silence, the kind that presses against your ribs. It was Tuesday morning. Quarterly strategy meeting, glass walls, long walnut table. My team seated in their usual spots, laptops open, coffee cups lined up like soldiers, and my boss, Richard Coleman, standing at the head of the table with his laser pointer. I had spent 3 weeks building that market expansion model. Late nights, takeout containers, missing my niece's birthday dinner. I believed in the numbers. I believed in the work. He clicked to my slide, paused, then sighed. "Jessica," he said, rubbing his temple like I'd given him a migraine. "This is why we're behind?" My stomach tightened. He turned to the room. "This projection is unrealistic. Honestly, it's useless." He didn't whisper it. He didn't soften it. He let it land. Useless. Someone shifted in their chair. My assistant, Mark, avoided eye contact. 2 analysts stared at their screens like they suddenly found spreadsheets fascinating. I felt heat crawl up my neck. I'm a dark-haired woman with olive skin. Normally, I tan easily. That morning, I could feel the flush climbing under my foundation. I swallowed. "Can you clarify which assumption you disagree with?" I asked. My voice didn't shake. I'm proud of that. He smirked. "All of them." A quiet chuckle from the far end of the table. He clicked past my slide. Just like that. 3 weeks of work dismissed in 8 seconds. Meeting over, people filtered out quickly. Nobody wanted to be associated with the useless model. Mark lingered. "For what it's worth," he said softly, "I thought it was solid." I smiled. "It is." And I meant that. Because here's what Richard didn't know. I triple-checked those numbers. I ran 3 independent scenario models, and I had data he hadn't even seen yet. But in corporate America, perception is power, and he had just labeled me useless. I drove home that night in silence, no music, no podcast, just the hum of the highway and the word replaying in my head. Useless. I thought about my mom. She cleaned houses for 20 years so I could graduate debt-free. I thought about being the only woman of color in my MBA cohort. I thought about every time I had to be twice as prepared to be taken half as seriously. Useless? No. Underestimated. There's a difference. And here's the thing about underestimating a woman who has nothing to prove but everything to protect. We don't explode. We calculate. The annual shareholder meeting was in 4 weeks. Richard was leading the growth presentation. And guess whose data he'd need to justify expansion? Mine. I opened my laptop that night, not to prove him wrong, but to make it undeniable. If he wanted to call me useless in front of the team, fine. I'd let my results speak in front of the entire company, and this time there would be no slide to click past. Chapter 2. The numbers don't lie. I didn't cry. That's the part people expect. That I went home, kicked off my heels, and let the word useless echo until it broke me. No, I changed into sweatpants, tied my hair into a low bun, and opened my laptop. Because numbers don't care about ego. They don't care who's loud in meetings. They don't care who smirks at the head of the table. They either hold up or they don't. And mine did. It was 9:42 p.m. when I logged back into the company server. The office lights were probably off by then. Richard was likely at some rooftop bar downtown, telling someone about his growth strategy. I opened my expansion model again. Market A, stable but saturated. Market B, risky but scalable. Market C, undervalued, overlooked, misunderstood. Kind of like me, I reran the sensitivity analysis, adjusted the volatility margin, rechecked competitor performance over the last 6 quarters. Everything aligned. In fact, if anything, I had been conservative. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen. So why dismiss it? Then it hit me. Because it wasn't his idea. Richard didn't hate bad data. He hated not controlling the narrative. The next morning, I got to the office early, 6:30 a.m. The cleaning crew was still vacuuming the hallway carpets. I printed out a revised executive summary, tight, sharp, undeniable. No fluff, just projections, risk mitigation strategy, and projected ROI within 18 months. At 8:15, I walked into his office. He barely looked up. Yes, I refined the expansion model, I said evenly. I'd like 5 minutes. He exhaled dramatically, but gestured for me to sit. I didn't sit. I laid the report on his desk and walked him through it, standing up. Concise, controlled, confident. When I finished, he tapped the last page. These numbers are aggressive. They're accurate. He leaned back in his leather chair, studied me like he was trying to decide whether I was naive or dangerous. You're emotionally attached to this, he said. I almost smiled. No, I replied calmly. I'm analytically attached. That landed. He flipped through the pages again, slower this time. You're saying, he said carefully, if we don't move into market C now, we lose first mover advantage. Yes. And you're confident in that projection? I am. Silence. Then he did something subtle. He didn't apologize. He didn't acknowledge yesterday. He said, leave this with me. Corporate translation, I need to see how I can make this mine. And that was fine, because here's what he still didn't know. I had already shared the preliminary data with finance, and finance loved it. Not because it was flashy, but because it was clean. Numbers don't lie, and spreadsheets don't care who gets credit. 3 days later, an email went out to senior leadership. Subject: Annual Shareholder Meeting, Growth Strategy Presentation Update. Richard would be presenting the expansion strategy, including Market C, my model, my projections, my framework, and at the bottom of the email, almost as an afterthought, Jessica Morales will provide supporting financial analysis during Q&A. Supporting. I stared at that word. Supporting. After building the backbone of the strategy, I felt the old version of me flare up, the one who wanted to storm into his office and demand recognition. But that version of me reacted. This version calculated, because Q&A wasn't a side note. It was where executives tested weakness. It was where analysts exposed cracks. It was where confidence either collapsed or crystallized. And if Richard thought I was just there to support, he had no idea what was coming. I closed my laptop slowly. 4 weeks until the annual meeting. 4 weeks to prepare not just answers, but proof. He called me useless in front of the team. At the annual meeting, the entire company would see exactly what I was worth. Chapter 3, the setup. Corporate success isn't built on brilliance. It's built on positioning. And Richard was very, very good at positioning. 2 weeks before the annual shareholder meeting, the rehearsal schedule went out. Full executive run-through, C-suite in the room, slides locked, narrative finalized. No surprises. That's what the email said. No surprises. I almost laughed because I had one. The rehearsal was held in the main conference hall, the one with the elevated stage and oversized projection screen, the kind of room designed to make power feel bigger than it is. I walked in early again. Navy sheath dress, hair straightened, parted down the middle, minimal makeup, calm expression. You learn as a woman in rooms like that confidence isn't loud, it's controlled. Richard was already there, reviewing the slide deck with the communications team. I spotted it immediately. Slide 27, Market C Expansion Strategy, my framework. But reworded, his tone, his phrasing, even the tagline had changed from my original: strategic entry through undervalued channels, to aggressive penetration of emerging demand. Aggressive, of course. He saw me looking. Cleaned it up, he said casually, made it stronger. Stronger? Right. I nodded. Looks good, because this wasn't the moment. The rehearsal started. The CEO, Martin Halpern, sat in the third row with a yellow legal pad. He was known for two things. One, cutting people off mid-sentence. Two, asking questions nobody could dodge. Richard began confidently. Revenue trends, competitive landscape, macro outlook, polish, practice. He reached slide 27. Our expansion into market C, he said smoothly, positions us ahead of competitors by at least 2 quarters. I watched the CEO's pen stop moving. Based on what sensitivity threshold? Martin asked. There it was. Richard hesitated, a flicker, barely noticeable, but I saw it. Well, he began, clicking to the supporting chart, we modeled conservative downside risk. Martin tilted his head. What's the elasticity coefficient under recession conditions? Silence. Not dramatic silence. Dangerous silence. Richard looked at the slide. The answer wasn't there. Because he hadn't built the model, I felt every pair of eyes shift slightly. Toward me, supporting financial analysis. That was my cue. Under recession stress, I said calmly from my seat, elasticity drops by 0.8, but demand rebounds within 2 quarters due to limited regional saturation. The CEO looked at me directly for the first time. And that's based on 6-year historical data from adjacent markets and current supply chain compression rates. Pause. He nodded slowly. Send that analysis to my office. I already did, I replied. A subtle shift in the room, energy, recognition. Richard cleared his throat and continued the presentation, but the rhythm was off now. Slightly rushed, slightly defensive, because the room had seen it. The crack. After rehearsal, as executives filtered out, Martin stopped me near the aisle. You built the Market C model? He asked. Yes, sir. Alone? Yes. He studied me for a second longer than comfortable. Be sharp during Q&A, he said. Investors will go deeper than we did. I'm counting on it. For the first time since that Tuesday morning, I felt something shift. Not validation, not yet, but visibility. And in corporate America, visibility is currency. That afternoon, Richard called me into his office. He closed the door. I need you aligned with me during Q&A, he said flatly. I am aligned with the numbers. His jaw tightened. This isn't about ego. No, it was exactly about ego. He stepped closer to his desk. You embarrassed me in there. I met his eyes evenly. I answered a question. Another silence. Then he said it. The thing men in power say when they feel control slipping. Don't overstep. There it was, the quiet warning. Stay in your place. I smiled slightly. I won't, I said. And I meant it because I wasn't planning to step over him. I was planning to step past him. The annual shareholder meeting was 5 days away. Investors, board members, senior leadership, live streamed to the entire company. And Q&A would not be rehearsed. No slide to hide behind. No rewritten taglines, just facts. And the truth about who actually built the strategy. He called me useless in front of the team. At the annual meeting, he was about to learn what that word really cost. Chapter 4, the annual meeting. The ballroom smelled like polished wood and expensive cologne. 300 chairs, floor-to-ceiling screens, company logo rotating slowly on a blue-lit backdrop, and my name printed in small letters on the program, Jessica Morales, Senior Financial Analyst, supporting financial analysis. I adjusted the sleeve of my blazer and looked out at the crowd filtering in. Investors in tailored suits, board members with sharp eyes, executives pretending not to be nervous. Richard stood near the stage, laughing a little too loudly at something the CFO said. Confident, relaxed, certain. He hadn't looked at me once. The lights dimmed at 9:00 a.m., sharp. The CEO opened with performance highlights. Applause came in controlled waves, safe territory. Then came growth strategy. Richard walked to center stage like he owned the building. Today, he began smoothly, we position ourselves for bold expansion. Click. Revenue chart. Click. Market comparison. Click. Slide 27. Market C, my market. Our entry into Market C, he said, pacing slowly, gives us a competitive edge of at least 2 fiscal quarters. His voice was steady, practiced. He delivered my framework like it had lived in his head for years, and to his credit, he was good. The room nodded along, investors typed notes, no visible cracks, until Q&A. The moderator stepped forward. We'll now open the floor to questions. A hand went up immediately. Front row, gray-haired investor, sharp glasses. Yes, Richard said. What's your downside protection if adoption lags by more than 15% in the first 2 quarters? Richard answered smoothly at first. Cost buffers, phased rollout, controlled exposure. Then came the follow-up. And who modeled your elasticity under recession compression? There it was again. Modeled, not projected, modeled. Richard hesitated just long enough for anyone paying attention to notice. Our finance team ran stress scenarios, he said. The investor didn't sit back. I'd like specifics. The moderator glanced at me. This was it. I stood, heels steady against the ballroom floor. Under a recession compression scenario, I began clearly. Elasticity decreases by 0.8 in quarter 1, stabilizes by quarter 2, and rebounds by quarter 3 due to constrained regional supply. Every head in the first 3 rows turned toward me. I continued. Our downside exposure caps at 6.4%, and we maintain liquidity protection through staggered vendor contracts already negotiated. Silence. Not awkward. Focused. The investor studied me. You built that model. Yes, sir. And you're confident in it? I didn't look at Richard. I am. A pause stretched across the room. Then the investor nodded once. Good. He sat down. And something subtle shifted. Energy, attention, credit. More hands went up. Each question drilled deeper. Operational timelines, capital allocation ratios, risk corridors. Every time Richard began broadly, eyes drifted to me for precision, and I delivered. Calm, exact, unshaken, because numbers don't panic, and neither do I. Then it happened. A board member in the back raised her hand. I have a question for Miss Morales directly. The room quieted. You mentioned constrained regional supply driving rebound in quarter 3. What gives you confidence competitors won't replicate that entry? I smiled slightly. Because we've already secured provisional distribution agreements in 2 of the 3 key corridors. A ripple of murmurs. That detail hadn't been in Richard's slide deck. It was in my appendix analysis, which he had skimmed. The board member leaned forward. And when were those agreements negotiated? Last month. Another pause. Then she said the sentence that changed everything. Why wasn't she leading this portion? Not loud, but unmistakable. The air shifted. Richard's jaw tightened. The CEO leaned back slowly in his chair. No one answered immediately, because there was no safe answer. Richard forced a controlled smile. We operate as a team. The board member didn't look convinced. Neither did half the room. The moderator closed Q&A shortly after. Applause filled the ballroom. Polite, professional, but different now. Warmer, directed. As executives stood and mingled, I felt it. People approaching me instead of passing by. Impressive analysis, sharp modeling. Great command of the data. Not loud praise, but intentional. And Richard, he shook hands, smiled for photos, but the center of gravity had shifted. For weeks, he'd controlled the narrative. But in a room full of decision makers, narrative means nothing without substance. And substance had my name on it. As the crowd thinned, the CEO approached me. Walk with me, he said. We stepped toward the side corridor away from the noise. You were prepared, he said. Yes, sir, he nodded. I value preparation. A beat. Then, let's schedule time this week. That was all. No promises, no declarations, but in corporate language, it meant everything. Richard brushed past me on his way out, low voice. You made your point. I met his eyes calmly. I answered questions. He didn't respond because this time there was nothing he could dismiss. He called me useless in front of the team. Today, the board called on me by name, and this story wasn't finished yet. Chapter 5. The results speak. The numbers came in 6 weeks later. Not projections, not models, not assumptions, results. Market C launched quietly. No fireworks, no press blitz, just controlled rollout, staggered vendor activation, and targeted regional marketing, exactly the way I had mapped it. By the end of quarter one, adoption lagged slightly, 10% under our optimistic scenario. I watched the internal dashboard like a heartbeat monitor. Steady, predictable, right on track with my conservative model. No panic, no scrambling. By quarter two, supply tightened across 2 competing regions, just like the historical compression pattern suggested. Demand shifted, our contracts held, adoption accelerated, and by quarter three, we weren't 2 quarters ahead of competitors. We were 3. The internal performance review meeting was smaller than the shareholder ballroom. Just senior leadership, CEO, CFO, division heads, Richard, and me. The CFO opened the performance slide. Green across the board, revenue exceeded projections by 4.2%. Liquidity stable, risk exposure below threshold. Martin, the CEO, folded his hands. Walk us through it, he said, not to Richard. To me, I stood, remote in hand, and this time there was no rewarded tagline, no softened credit. This outcome, I began evenly, is the result of early corridor acquisition and elasticity-based timing. I clicked to the comparative chart, forecast versus actual. The lines almost mirrored each other, a quiet kind of perfection. I didn't rush, didn't dramatize, I just showed them. Step by step, assumption, strategy, outcome. When I finished, the room sat in thoughtful silence. Then the CFO said, "This is one of the cleanest forecast to performance alignments we've had in 5 years." I felt something shift inside my chest, not pride, validation, different thing. Richard cleared his throat. To be fair, he said, execution was a team effort. It was. But leadership, modeling, timing, that had a name. And this time, no one redirected it. The CEO looked directly at me. Jessica, he said calmly, how scalable is this framework? It's replicable across 2 adjacent markets with minor regulatory adjustments. He nodded once. Prepare a proposal. That was it. No applause, no dramatic announcement, just opportunity. Real opportunity. Later that afternoon, HR emailed me. Subject line, role adjustment discussion. I walked into the conference room expecting a polite acknowledgement. What I received was different. We're creating a director of strategic expansion role, the HR partner said. Effective next quarter. My pulse stayed steady. And reporting structure, I asked, you'll report directly to the CFO, not Richard, directly. When the announcement went out company-wide, it was brief, professional, measured, but one line stood out. This promotion recognizes Jessica Morales for her leadership in modeling and executing the successful Market C expansion. Leadership, modeling, executing, not supporting, not assisting, not useless. Richard stopped by my desk that evening. No audience, no stage, just fluorescent office lighting and the quiet hum of computers shutting down. He hesitated. I may have misjudged you, he said finally. It wasn't an apology, but it was close enough. I looked up at him calmly. You did. No anger, no edge, just truth. He nodded once and walked away. That night, I called my mom. They promoted me, I said. There was a pause on the line. Then she laughed softly. I never worried, she said. You always let your work talk. And that's the thing. in rooms where voices compete, in spaces where titles try to overpower talent. You don't always need to shout. You don't always need to fight. Sometimes you build something so solid, so precise, so undeniable that when the moment comes, you don't defend yourself. You present the evidence. He called me useless in front of the team, but in the end, I didn't argue. I didn't retaliate. I didn't even raise my voice. I let the results speak, and they said everything.